Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff. This is Nachos Book Reviews. And on this episode, I'm going to be talking about a Jack London short story called The Red One, which is most easily found in this wonderful Bantam mass market paperback collection, To Build a Fire and Other Stories. Although it's in the public domain, so you could find the story collection called The Red One on Project Gutenberg, and it's the first story in that collection. This is one of my favorite short stories of all time. It's my favorite Jack London story. I'm a definite Jack London fan. I read Martin Eden. I've read Call of the Wild. I've read The Seawolf. I've read a good amount of his short stories, and he's terrific. I feel like he's kind of a source for somebody like Robert E. Howard. And some of the letters that he and Lovecraft traded back and forth, Howard every once in a while makes a nod to Jack London as if he's the greatest thing ever. And so I think a lot of why I like Robert E. Howard is because of what I like about Jack London. Very propulsive, verb-heavy sentences, action-oriented stories, with some extra meta built in every once in a while. So this is a really interesting one in that it's a science fiction story. It was written near the end of London's life. He retired back to his, estates. Was not in good health, and I don't think he really was doing well financially. I think the last years of Jack London's life were not that pretty, emotionally, financially. He was in kind of a dark place, and some of that leaks into this story. But it was published in October of 1918, and it's the story of a naturalist who's exploring the Solomon Islands, discovers that this red sphere, this thing called the Red One, that purportedly fell from the stars, thousands of years ago, and discovered by these natives on this island, and the adventures that ensue. And it's a pretty good story. It's very dark, a very dark ending for sure. So I'm going to spoil the hell out of the story. I would suggest if you want to read it, and this is the kind of story where I think you want to go in clean. So I would say, pause at some point and try to go find the story. And read it. It's really terrific. But the basics of the story center around this guy Bassett, who's a naturalist, and he's exploring the Solomon Islands, and he's on the island of Guadalcanal for real. And he has a porter named Sagawa, and he hears this sound. I think he's on the ship at the time. This incredible sound comes from the interior of the island. Has no idea what it is. And I'll read a couple of passages of London describing the sound. The first passage comes from the very opening of the story. So this is how he kicks it off. Quote, "There it was, the abrupt liberation of sound. As he timed it with his watch, Bassett likened it to the trump of an archangel. Walls of cities, he meditated, might well fall down before so vast and compelling a summons." And again, later in the story, a little more about it. "Archangels spoke in it. It was magnificently beautiful before all other sounds. It was invested with the intelligence of supermen of planets of other suns. It was the voice of God, seducing and commanding to be heard." End quote. So he hears the sound, he grabs his porter, and he runs into the jungle. And right into a pack of cannibalistic natives. Now, sometimes writers of this generation are accused of the brown men and the white, intelligent, civilized people and the brown people. Like there's this disparity. I think H. Rider Haggard is accused of it. Probably London in some ways. Howard possibly. But in this case, it was true. This guy who discovered the Solomons, named Madonna, Spanish guy, like the 1500s, 1600s, discovered the Solomons, named them, because he named them after thinking it was where Solomon, his treasure came from, the mythical city of Ophir in the Bible, where Solomon's treasure came from. But the problem was he had a tough time staying in the area because the tribes, when he was negotiating with the tribes, they just wanted to eat them. So the cannibalism stuff is real. Has historical documents that they had a tough time settling that area or staying there because of the cannibalistic tribe. So in this case, cannibals being the main kind of baddies in the story is a real deal. Sagawa and Bassett are running towards this sound, and they run into a pack of cannibals. Sagawa is decapitated. And Bassett spends the next couple of days running. So the tribe cut off his access to the boat to the sea, so he's running inland. And there are 2 or 3 days of harrowing chases where he's being stung by mosquitoes in the dark. He's running. So he has his shotgun, and every time the cannibals think they can get a little close and he's faltering, he blows one of them away. And it's a very graphic story. So London does not spare the details when it comes to graphic stuff. So he battles his way through these cannibals and gets through the jungle to these grasslands. And once he hits the grasslands, the previous tribe chasing him kind of bails because it's someone else's territory. He walks through the grasslands, gets to another forested area, and almost collapses. Then he's in the territory of another tribe. And they're kind of surrounding him, poking him, trying to kind of get at him, but they respect his shotgun, and he shoots it off a few times. But he winds up passing out. And then the story is now told from him months later, after he's been in the camp, kind of a guest, kind of a prisoner, but he still has a shotgun, but he's too weak to go anywhere. And he's just kind of there. And he hears that sound again, much closer than the last time. And he finds out that the Red One is what it's called. It's a mysterious god that lies inland. And because he's too weak, he can't, go and see for himself, and he can't get the tribe to take him because the tribe says, if anyone who looks on the Red One out of our tribe is dead. So he's got this problem to deal with. So during this, he's speaking mostly with this guy Ingern, and Ingern is someone who, when the tribe, I guess, gets people to eat, they cut off the head, and Ingern takes the heads, and he's a headhunter. So he shrinks them and cures them, and so Bassett's in this hut often, while Ingern is curing heads, and their heads hanging in the rafters, and he's smoking them, and he has to go out and collect specific wood to smoke these things. So, but the conversations they have, Ingern is like kind of looking at him as, I'm going to have your head soon. No worries, where Bassett is hoping that he's going to get better and leave. So there's some wonderfully frank dialogue about Bassett's chances between him and this guy. And I want to read a couple of passages because they're really good. So Ingern says, quote, "I would like to have the curing of your head." Ingern changed the subject. "It is different from any other head. No devil has a head like it. Besides, I would cure it well. I would take months and months. The moons would come and the moons would go, and the smoke would be very slow. And I should myself gather the materials for the curing smoke. The skin would not wrinkle. It would be as smooth as your skin now." And another section where Bassett is trying to debate with him, like, "Listen, let me go see the Red One and I'll have your head." And Ingern's like, "I'm going to have it anyway." And he says, quote, "I will have your head anyway when you are dead." He added with the brutal frankness of the savage, "Besides, you have not long to live. You are almost a dead man now. You will grow less strong. In not many months I shall have you here, turning and turning in the smoke. It is pleasant, through the long afternoons, to turn the head of one you have known as well as I know you. And I shall talk to you and tell you the many secrets you want to know, which will not matter, for you will be dead." Quote. So, really great, just great dialogue, and very, as London, it's kind of like To Build a Fire. London's very harsh, man. He is not sparing to his characters. His stories are often very brutal, and have very abrupt and dark endings. So there's this wonderful thing between the two of them. Then there's a relationship between Bassett and a woman named Balata, who's a woman of the tribe. And this is where kind of London's misogyny and his misanthropy really, really come into play. I mean, I haven't read another story where London's his attitude towards women and or natives was so dark, and I'm going to read you some of it because it's not too pretty. So here's a section where he wants Balata, falls in love with him, and he finds her completely grotesque, but he wants to use her to somehow go see the Red One. So here's his kind of thinking on the subject. "Squat and lean at the same time, asymmetrically limbed, string-muscled, as if with the lengths of cordage, dirt-caked from infancy, save for casual showers, she was as unbeautiful a prototype of woman as he, with a scientist's eye, had ever gazed upon. Her breasts advertised at the one time her maturity and youth, And if by nothing else, her sex was advertised by the one article of finery with which she was adorned, namely a pig's tail thrust through a hole in her left earlobe. So lately had the tail been severed that its raw end still oozed blood that dried upon her shoulder like so much candle droppings. And her face! Exclamation point. A twisted and wizened complex of apish features, perforated by upturned sky-open Mongolian nostrils, by a mouth that sagged from a huge upper lip and faded precipitously into a retreating chin, and by peering querulous eyes that blinked as blink the eyes of denizens of monkey cages. So, ooh, man, hardcore, Mr. London. And now later on, he uses her, and his kind of disdain for her as a member of the other sex is quite plain. So I'll read a brief passage. Eternal female she was, capable of any treason for the sake of love. And though the sight of her was provocative of nausea, and the contact of her provocative of despair, although he could not escape her awfulness in his dream-haunted nightmares of her, he nevertheless was aware of the cosmic verity of sex that animated her, and that made her own life of less value than the happiness of her lover with whom she hoped to meet. Juliet or Bellotta? Where was the intrinsic difference? The soft and tender product of ultra-civilization, or her bestial prototype of 100,000 years before her? There was no difference. End quote. So, Jack, easy, you know? Women, come on. So, yeah, pretty hardcore. The story rises above his issues, I think, personally. So, it's still totally worth reading. So then he finally seduces her, and they go to the Red One. And they find this wonderful, huge red metal ball sitting inland that must have fallen years and years ago, littered with bones, and they've set up a striker and a king post. So when they hit it with this big tree, it makes the sound. So here's some descriptions of the Red One, which I will read. Quote, a perfect sphere, fully 200 feet in diameter. The top of it was 100 feet below the level of the rim. He likened the color quality of it to lacquer. Indeed, he took it to be some sort of lacquer applied by man, but a lacquer too marvelously clever to have been manufactured by the bushfolk. Brighter than bright cherry red, its richness of color was as if it were red builded upon red. It glowed and iridesced in the sunlight as if gleaming up from underlay under underlay of red, end quote. And then there's this wonderful property of it in that it's a purveyor of sound in the very slightest way. So he says, quote, he moved his fingertips, which up to that had merely rested along the surface, and felt the whole gigantic sphere quicken and live and respond. It was incredible. So light a touch on so vast a mass. Yet did it quiver under the fingertip caress in rhythmic vibrations that became whisperings and rustlings and mutterings of sound, but of sound so different, so elusive thin, that it was shimmeringly sibilant, so mellow that it was maddeningly sweet, piping like an elfin horn, which last was just what Bassett decided would be like a pearl from some bell of the gods reaching earthward from across space. So now he begins to philosophically think about, man, you know, this thing came from this, who sent this? How did this get here? It couldn't have just fallen because it was constructed, right? And he's kind of blown away at the irony of what has happened, that it's fallen in among, you know, this tribe of illiterates, really. And there's this incredible possibility of what could be inside, what could be deciphered from it, could they cure cancer, all these things. So this is a wonderful passage. It really is one of my favorite parts of the story. Quote, Bassett laughed aloud, almost with madness, at the thought of this wonderful messenger, winged with intelligence across space, to fall into a bushman's stronghold, and he worshipped by ape-like, man-eating and head-hunting savages. It was as if God's word had fallen into the muckmire of the abyss underlying the bottom of hell, as if Jehovah's commandments had been presented on carved stone to the monkeys of the monkey cage at the zoo, as if the Sermon on the Mount had been preached in a roaring bedlam of lunatics. And a second one, which is really also very wonderful. Who are they? What were they? Those far distant and superior ones who had bridged the sky with their gigantic red iridescent heaven-singing message. Surely and long since had they too trod the paths on which man had so recently, by the calendar of the cosmos, set his feet. And to be able to send such a message across the pit of space, surely they had reached those heights to which man, in tears and travail and bloody sweat, in darkness and confusion of many councils, was so slowly struggling. And what were they on their heights? Had they won brotherhood? Or had they learned that the law of love imposed the penalty of weakness and decay? Was strife life? Was the rule of all the universe the pitiless rule of natural selection? And most immediate and poignantly, were their far conclusions, their long-won wisdoms, shut even then in the huge metallic heart of the Red One, waiting for the first Earthman to read? Of one thing he was certain, no drop of red dew shaken from the lion mane of some sun in torment was the sounding sphere. It was of design, not chance, and it contained the speech and wisdom of the stars. And the wonderful irony here is that this wonderful wisdom, this technological sophistication, whatever it is being worshipped by this tribe, and beings are being sacrificed at the foot of this sphere. Their heads cut off. So when Basset goes there, it's littered with bones and trinkets. They worship the Red One as this bloody god that demands sacrifice. So the metaphor here is just wonderful, that, you know, what possibilities here exist, and yet it's being used as kind of a stone idol for the slaughter of thousands. And to me, it also goes in line with God's word being preached in the bedlam of lunatics. Kind of London's statement about who we are as human beings. Muhammad came and went, Jesus came and went, Buddha came and went, and whoever else brought these wonderful messages, and the world is a nightmare. There's still a Holocaust. So to me, there's some resonance here of kind of human condition stuff that gets into this story in a really terrific way. So really wonderful. And London, that bit about love and weakness in there. London was, famously all about it's the law of, tooth and fang, and the law of wilderness and the natural world is a brutal law. Survival of the fittest, that was kind of his thing. Very influenced by Herbert Spencer, who was a philosopher who espoused this in the 19th century. So, not kind of a peace love guy, Jack London. Even throughout all this harshness, we don't have a good hero. So he's very hate-filled, and here's a couple of passages kind of support that. When he's kind of abusing Bellata's affection for him. Quote, "Yet did Basset insist on having his man's will satisfied, at the woman's risk, that he might solve the mystery of the Red One's singing, though she should die long and horribly and screaming. And Bellata, being mere woman, yielded. She led him into the forbidden quadrant." So Basset is fantasizing about getting better after he's seen the Red One, and he wants to get out of there and lead an expedition back, to civilization and have this find reported. And he writes, quote, "Then would he lead an expedition back, and although the entire population of Guadalcanal be destroyed, extract from the heart of the Red One the message of the world from other worlds," end quote. So our hero's he's going at these natives and they're horrible and she's ugly and these pigs. Meanwhile, he would, genocide the island just to get at what's in the sphere, right? So I wonder, this is the kind of thing where you're like, is London really despising the natives himself as a writer, or is he putting it in Basset? And unfortunately, I feel like it's a little bit of both. At the very end, he's taken to the Red One, and they sound it right in front of him. And it's this incredible experience that he has, but he makes a deal with Ingern that, just sound the Red One, let me hear it, and then you can have my head. And he kind of points to the back of his neck, and Ingern brings an axe. Now, Basset still has a shotgun. There's an interesting passage near the end here. After the sound has happened, and Basset knows he's about to die, part of his brain thinks, I could kind of just blow my head off and cheat Ingern out of his head. And then in his mind, he was like, that wouldn't be right. The guy's played square with me all throughout. I'm not going to do that. So he puts the shotgun down and signals to Ingern. Then there's this last wonderful phrase when Ingern is about to strike. and he feels kind of the beginning of the axe on his neck. And so he says, simultaneously with the bite of the steel and the onrush of the dark, in a flashing instant of fancy, he saw the vision of his head turning slowly, always turning, in the devil house beside the breadfruit tree. The end. So, yeah, there's just something about the idea that this thing has dropped where no civilization can get at it. And then, because of Bassett, how deplorable Bassett is, there might even be an extra part of the story that makes very good logic that London didn't intend. Where maybe it's a good thing that somebody like him doesn't get back to civilization, because there's another horrible savagery within him that's been kind of quasi-civilized, So, but there's just this wonderful image of this incredibly sophisticated thing that's just laying there, and Bassett laughing of the irony about it all. And it's really wonderfully well written. There's some wonderful passages in here. I've read some of them, but London, to me, was a very good writer. Very propulsive and yet descriptive. And so this, it's just a great example of his storytelling powers. So, been a favorite of mine for a long time. So I wanted to share it on my BookTube channel. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.